For more, we have joining us today Dr. James Kim, a research fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's good to have you back on the show.
Nice to see you again, Chang-ho.
So let's start with the latter half of that report we just heard there. Very big bites. That's what an unnamed senior US official told reporters how he thinks the North Korea denuclearization process needs to go. But at the same time, he also said that the immediate priority is to freeze all of North Korea's nuclear weapons programs. So can a nuclear freeze be considered a, quote, big bite for now?
Well, I think we're already there. We've had a freeze on the tests and developments for the past year, a little over a year. Some experts argue that there's no need for further tests because they're done developing. But if we mean by freeze further proliferation, creation of new weapons, then I think it's meaningful if they could try to somehow see through that second part, which is on the proliferation side. Again, it requires some inspection and some verification, and I'm not exactly sure how they're going to do that.
I mean, so do you think it can be this, the framework is there for that to be achieved in the meeting next week?
I'm not clear, but at the moment, there aren't any encouraging signs. They've only had about 2 or 3 working level meetings, and a lot of that was devoted to logistics behind the second summit. I'm not sure where there was a time for the negotiators to talk about a lot of these very, very difficult issues. So it's not clear to me that that we're going to see substantive outcomes in that regard at the next summit. But in the follow-up meetings after next summit, we could hope for some more better results. But for now, there aren't any encouraging signs, and that's not to say that we won't be getting any good surprising news after the summit. So let's hope for the best.
Before we move on to the negotiations that are currently taking place in Hanoi, let me just stick with what the US official also said as well, that he said the US will eventually need a full inventory of North Korea's nuclear arsenal well before the full denuclearization. So he seems to be laying out pretty much what Washington wants out of this process for denuclearization: a nuclear freeze, a list of North Korea's nuclear arsenal, and then dismantlement. Does that seem like the order that they're going for right now?
Well, that's been the order for the past year again. There isn't any change there, but Secretary Pompeo has stated recently in some of his recent statements that the goal really is to go as far as they can. And I believe the administration is a little bit more open to other possibilities. So while that's the preferred step, if North Korea is not willing to play by that rule, then Washington is willing to consider what they have to offer.
Let's go to that summit, so to the negotiations that are taking place. So North Korean and US officials are meeting in Hanoi. They have been for the last couple of days, and we're guessing they're going to continue meeting as they prepare for the summit next week. They're thought to be, hashing out the details for the declaration itself. But as we said, there's only a few days left. I mean, what can we expect? What can they achieve during this time?
Yeah, it's just not clear to me how they're going to work through a lot of these difficult issues in a matter of days or hours that they're meeting together. But again, we have to hope for the best and see what we get when President Trump meets with Kim Jong-un. But for now, these signs are not that encouraging.
This isn't how normally these kind of diplomatic events work, is it? I mean, we saw it in the last event as well, but last summit. But normally there's weeks of negotiation, months of negotiations before they reach this agree on a declaration, whereas now they seem to be drafting it together in a room on a piece of paper.
Right. I mean, if you recall the last working level meeting, which was the first meeting between Kim Hyok-chol and Steve Biegun, it was after the first meeting President Trump basically came out and said, we're doing the second summit. So I'm not sure there was much time for the negotiators to do their work before that announcement was made. But again, if this is not a bottom-up approach, but if it's a top-down approach, we might see some surprises come 27th or 28th.
We just heard as well in that report that the South Korean nuclear envoy, Lee Do-hun, is also now in Hanoi and will also be either joining the talks or being briefed by his US counterpart. but we'll see what happens there. But what does that mean? What does that show? The fact that South Korea's nuclear envoy is also there in Hanoi.
Lee Do-hoon's probably not sitting in the room with Kim Young-chul and Steve Biegun while that negotiation is taking place. But there's good chemistry between Steve Biegun and Lee Do-hoon through the working level meetings and consultative sessions that they've had on this issue. And I think it shows good chemistry between those two officials. It shows also that there's close coordination, at least or appearance of close coordination between United States and South Korea as they move forward on this matter. So overall, I think this could be, on the one hand, it's public diplomacy. On the other hand, there could be some interesting, inputs that Lee Do-hoon can give to Steve Biegun if he requires some more additional information about North Korea's true intentions. Maybe South Korea has some information that Steve Biegun does not have while he's talking to Kim Young-chul in that room. So any additional input is useful, but you hold out. Again, I don't think Lee Do-hoon's really playing a central role in these discussions.
But Lee Do-hoon's presence in Hanoi leads to speculation that the US and North Korea might be discussing the end of declaration to an agreement to end the Korean War. Do you think there might be a possibility that there might be progress on that?
There's always possibility there, given that it is not something that is required from the U.S. side in terms of sanctions relief. So outside of sanctions relief, all these are possible. There's been talks about potential liaison offices being opened in respective capitals, and this is another issue about end of war declaration. So all of these are up for grabs. The question here is, number one, what does North Korea have to offer? And number two, what are both sides willing to trade for, whatever the other side is offering?
It was originally announced that President Trump and Kim Jong-un would be meeting over 2 days, February 27th and 28th. But US officials have told reporters that the meeting will be similar in format to the Singapore summit, and that's led to speculation that the two leaders might only sit down for 1 day of summit talks and maybe have like a dinner on the first day, but not 2 days long discussions. I mean, do you think that could happen, and what does it mean if President Trump and Kim Jong-un only meet to have summit talks for 1 day?
It probably means that there isn't much to talk about. And again, those are not encouraging signs. But, we could be in for a surprise come 27th or 28th. Maybe both men have other things to tend to, so they need to end that meeting early. There are some signals about North Korea's plans after the talks. There may be follow-up meetings in Beijing and/or Moscow, and so there are a lot of moving pieces here. We don't want to jump to any conclusions, but certainly it's not encouraging when the previous discussion was that this was going to be a 2-day meeting, but now there's a potential here for this being only a 1-day meeting. So these aren't encouraging, but you hope for the best.
We'll have to see whether it is 2 days of summits or whether they're just meeting for dinner on the first day. The first summit in Singapore had huge significance because, of course, it was the first ever meeting between the leaders of North Korea and the US. Even the handshake alone was a historic moment. Next week's meeting will be hard to live up to that. So would you agree that the pressure is on still for significant progress to be made in the contents of the agreement that the two sides agree on?
I believe so. I think Kim Jong-un wants something on the sanctions side. President Trump is facing increasing pressure from scrutiny within. The Democratic Party is within Congress is playing the role of a check on the president's ability to see through a good deal here. On the other hand, we're also seeing within the administration there are some possible cleavages there and disagreements. So the president needs to produce some results here to convince these naysayers that he's got something really meaningful here going on with North Korea. Same thing with Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un needs to show that these meetings are producing some results for the elites within Pyongyang. If he's not able to win sanctions relief, then it's not clear to everybody in Pyongyang, or for that matter in Beijing or Moscow, why he's continuing to talk with President Trump.
Let's now turn to some other interesting news that's coming out as well. It's been reported that the U.S. National Security Advisor, John Bolton, will be coming to South Korea this week and ahead of the summit next week. But his reputation as a hawk raises various questions about why he's visiting now. I mean, why do you think he's visiting?
Well, first of all, Steve Biegun, who is typically leading this effort, is in Vietnam. So any meetings that he could have at the working level with South Korea to coordinate on negotiations with North Korea, he's not able to do that physically. Secondly, the National Security Council within the White House is the point for White House on this meeting. So it's just natural that it be someone within the NSC. Usually it's been someone like Matt Pottinger or Allison Hooker who took the lead role on this. But it seems to me that they're placing high priority here, and John Bolton wants to take some measurable steps in this regard. Thirdly, they're sending a really strong message here to North Korea that they need to offer something that's meaningful. Otherwise, there's Bolton here that's waiting in the wings, and he doesn't like all this time wasting going on with these negotiations. So it's not only coordination with South Korea, but also some signals that they're sending to Pyongyang, as a slight nudge, if you will, to get them to offer up something meaningful for the U.S.
And final last point I want to look at as well. South Korea's Unification Ministry has confirmed that Pyongyang has rejected Seoul's request for North Korea to jointly take part in the March 1st independence movement's 100-year anniversary celebrations. Now, South Korea has been looking to have this kind of joint event for some time, but do you think this signals anything towards the outcomes of the North Korea-US summit, or is that something separate that we can consider for now?
It's possible that North Korea is signaling that there isn't going to be much coming out here of this summit, and they don't want any follow-up meetings with South Korea on other matters. But it's also possible that Kim Jong-un has other things lined up right after the summit, namely, as I mentioned, a visit to Beijing possibly, and or a meeting with Vladimir Putin. So we probably shouldn't jump to any conclusions here, but it certainly isn't really encouraging on that end either.
Well, that's where we have to wrap things up. Thank you for coming in today and sharing us your insights.
Thanks for having me.